Welcome back to the Social Web TV, the internet TV show that answers the question, who owns your data? With these two simple words, you do. All right, it's episode 5, the Empire,
No, nobody struck back. That was good.
no lightsabers, no action figures.
That's right.
We just keep plowing ahead.
Yeah. But today's mission, to bring back sexy to APIs.
If it ever was sexy.
As sexy as they can be.
Yes.
But they shouldn't be sexier than they are today.
All right, well, actually, we've got a really exciting topic, which is one of the new building blocks. In fact, last week we talked about open specs as building blocks for this next phase of the web. And we have with us a few folks involved in some of these building blocks, Joseph and Chris.
Welcome
And
back to the second show.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
we are missing another person who's been here for every other episode and who's also been involved in one of the building blocks.
Yeah, we've only got his soda can here in memoriam.
David, are you out there on the beach watching this?
Can you hear
Is he,
us?
is he on vacation, really?
I have no idea.
Is that
So,
what he did?
Nah, maybe.
all right, today's show, portable contacts. And why don't we dive in with a description of what the heck that is and what people should be looking for out of this new project.
Probably the easiest thing to do is start with a little background. We talked about the web itself becoming social, and probably all of you have used a lot of sites where one of the cool things you can do is share information that you're doing with other people, right? So you're seeing what stories they're digging or what reviews they're sharing or what stories they're posting on their blogs or photos. And if you've used any of those sites, it's pretty common these days where they'll want to find out who your friends are, and they'll ask you to import your Gmail address book or other kind of webmail and pull it in. And then they show you, which of the people you know who are already on this site, and you can connect to them, and you can invite other people you want to have join you. And this has become very common, and obviously the reason why so many of these sites do it is because these social sites aren't very interesting if you're not connected to people you care about, right? That's sort of what makes these sites social.
And it's also kind of the engine of viral growth, which
A lot of sites
really
are doing it for growth as well, right?
driving so much of the social web as we know it today.
And it's also just because people know a lot of other people, and so trying to ask a user to put in from scratch, tell me everybody you can think of. I mean, it's one thing to say, upload a photo of yourself, tell me what your homepage is, but to say, tell me like the hundreds of people you know, and I'll tell you which few of them are on this site, is obviously a daunting procedure, and so it's really important to sort of say, well, if you've already filled that information out somewhere else, pull that in. That's certainly something we talk about. But until recently, the way that's actually happened, and it may not be apparent to you if you're just sort of a user of one of these sites, is most of these sites will ask you for your credentials, your password on that other site, and then they'll go over to the site and essentially impersonate you logging into the site and browsing over to wherever you have your friends list, sort of all with computers behind the scenes, and then they'll kind of scrape out all that information and bring it back to do the information. And that's because there aren't good standards until recently, and one we'll talk about, for being able to go in and give secure access to that information and then to pull it down in a standard way.
Now, there's a term for this general behavior that we see out there of asking users to cough up their credentials.
It's the password anti-pattern. And basically, I mean, to Joseph's point, the idea is that these other websites or services that you're using are asking for your private information, which actually gives them access to a whole lot more information than just the scoped information that you're interested in sharing. So in this particular case, we're talking about just getting a list of your friends in a way that the computer, the service, can identify them and say, hey, by the way, you've given us a list of your friends. We know they're already here. We're going to point you to them so you can interact with them more naturally. Instead, what's happening is you're providing, for example, your Gmail address as well as your password to your account. And then that service goes over and has access to everything, including the ability not only to send messages on your behalf, but in the case of, for example, a Google account, accessing your Google Checkout account,
Right.
accessing your search history, and things like that that it really doesn't need to have access to in order to do the very simple thing of just telling you where your friends are.
Yeah, so you really have to trust those services to not abuse that information. But it's also, until recently, there hasn't really been an alternative for those sites. Okay, so fast forwarding until the now recent past, obviously a lot of those sites realized this and saw it was a problem, both because their users are giving away their passwords and because it's a lot of work for developers to build up. I mean, you may take it for granted that you can go in and import your Gmail in most places, but there's no easy way to do that for any new sites. Every startup has to refigure out how to break into Gmail and suck all that data out. And so most of these sites realize, well, this isn't going away, and it is actually useful to let users use their address books across these different sites. And so each of the major big players has built their own sort of custom proprietary version of an API, which is just a sort of standard programmatic way to go in and get your information out.
So very explicitly, in the last, 6 months or so, we've seen address book APIs come out from Microsoft, Google, and Yahoo.
Yep.
And in terms of giving users access to their data, this is actually a really big step
It's huge,
forward.
right? And they've also all done a way of saying, I can give access to that information without having to give away my password. Again, it's all sort of been custom in each place. So,
Or at least giving away your password to a third-party site.
that's right. So yeah, so if you've seen these things where when you want to log in, it takes you over to Yahoo or Google and you log in there and it says, hey, do you really trust this site to have access to your information? And then it kind of bounces you back. That's those sort of patterns. But again, until very recently, every company kind of invented it from scratch. So you had Google AuthSub and the Google Contacts API, Yahoo BBAuth and the Yahoo Address Book API, Microsoft Live ID Delegated Authentication and the Live Contacts API. Right. And even within Yahoo, Flickr has yet a different version, Flickr Auth, Facebook has Facebook Auth. And so while there's been progress in terms of how do I not have to completely hack to get this information, it's still very hard for a site that wants to let you as a user come to a site and say, hey, here's who I am, here's who I know. Do that in an easy way because they have to choose for each site to implement a custom thing for each of those sites, and of course they're all changing.
Well, and the point there is that actually creates a pretty high cost of doing this the right way.
That's right.
And so the notion that we sort of want to advance with this Portable Contacts API is around lowering the cost to do the right thing in a way that protects people's privacy and makes it sort of a more secure transaction while not really even changing a whole lot except for who you give your password to, which should really be only the site that issues those credentials in the first place.
And it's pretty clear that if you're a user, what you want to be able to do is come to a site, decide if you trust it or not, let them have access to whatever subset of your information you want them to have in a way that doesn't compromise you. And if you're a site developer, what you want is an easy way to let users come in with whatever site they happen to use and pull that information in and not to have to maintain a lot of custom code for every single site you want to interact with.
So Joseph, if I understand correctly, at some point when you saw the emergence of these 3 new APIs, some sort of light bulb went off in your head and you saw some kind of opportunity to do something new.
Well, exactly. And I mean, at Plaxo, we've been in this game for 6 years now, trying to integrate not only with all these webmail providers, but Outlook and Mac and Thunderbird and AOL Instant Messenger, and every one of them is different, right? And so it's been a huge amount of work to have to maintain all these all. And it's not something that really provides any competitive advantage to any particular player. It's just kind of a tax because things are fragmented. It's just sort of the natural, entropic state of things and everybody's working in different ways. And not only did I see, finally these guys actually have real APIs, so whatever they had to go through in terms of privacy and business and other kinds of hurdles to say, it's okay if we release a real API and not just let people scrape us, that was huge progress. And in parallel, there was this OAuth project that we talked about a bit on the last show, which was trying to say, you guys are all doing this way of accessing the data without giving out your password, but you're all doing it differently, and that's sort of a tax on everybody. Let's come up with a common recipe that's simple and does it right once, that we can write code in every popular language that already does it for you. You can just drop it in. And then on any given site, you'll just be able to use this standard OAuth instead of having to go do the custom thing for each site, large and small. And that pattern was very successful, right? Google now supports OAuth for all of their APIs, and we've seen lots of support from other big players and small as well. And so I thought the timing was perfect to do the same thing for address book APIs. Let's come up with one simple standard for letting you get access to your address book data and friends list data that everybody can implement.
Well, and an important point on that in terms of how we're going about doing this is that we're actually looking at the last 10 years of contact style data formats and APIs, starting with something called vCard, which almost all mobile phones support, almost all address book support, taking that and then expanding it to make it more in line with trends in social networks.
And how do you actually share it between services? That's right.
So the idea was
sort of old school standards for describing the contact information, although they don't tend to have some of the more modern features like your different friending relationships or instant messaging or things that have come up since then. But there has to be that whole process of how do I go give access, how do I say what I want them to have, how do I let them look for updates. And so the funny thing in this case was I think because this momentum is building around these other building blocks, once I started sort of casually floating the notion in the community about let's get a standard address book API together, I think it just clicked for everybody, right? I think it was very surprising in a great way to see how many people, large and small, said, oh yeah, that's an obvious next step, I'm totally on board, let's figure this stuff out. And so we've sort of had an informal process that's been gaining steam, I think, over the last couple of months to craft a spec. I've got the latest draft spec right here. We can link this up if you want to jump in and read the details.
The
This
gory
may
details.
not be something all of our viewers want to dive into.
Definitely don't want to miss section 3.6.4. Anyway,
But if you
but-
are a developer,
Yeah.
you might want to begin to dive in at this point.
and I hope when you look at this, what you'll see is it's actually easier and less intimidating than almost anything that's out there. And if you do it once, you'll be able to work with all these different websites for free. So I think it's just sort of another interesting example of how, as a user, once this gets adopted, which I think hopefully will happen quite soon now, it won't necessarily be any different from what you were doing before, but it'll be easier, it'll be more secure. You'll probably expect to start seeing it work on lots more sites because you don't have to sort of make that tough cost calculation about, well, how many people really use niche site X? Can I really afford to do custom integration with that site? It'll just sort of work. And in a world where a social web is only as good as who you know, making that who you know data in your control to move around between sites, I think is going to be a very important catalyst for this really to go mainstream.
So at this stage, it's a draft spec. There are a bunch of different folks at companies large and small and grassroots folks involved. When this is all finished, who's going to own this spec?
Well, it's what we've all been trying to do, which is that these are free specs that anybody can implement. We'll make sure that we set it up so that nobody owns the intellectual property. There's no patents, whether that's through this Open Web Foundation that's been recently formed or something like that. It's meant to be an easy open building block that just makes the web a better place. And certainly I think the businesses involved, they all realize that lowering this barrier, lowering this tax is going to grow the pie and allow everybody to get in there and do better.
Well, because it's based on existing work that already has a lot of the intellectual property stuff dealt with.
Right.
It means that a lot more people will be able to adopt it more readily, I think.
And I think part of the trend here is trying to invent as little as possible.
Yeah.
So, the authentication and the access part is already doled out to things like OAuth. Even the how do you discover it and get access to it, same process being used in OpenID and other specs, right? The schema itself is as close to vCard, as it can be so that it'll easily work with legacy applications. It's all about trying to, how do you just pull the pieces
Make
together,
incremental improvements.
invent a little bit better, and then make it really easy and consistent. And that's the way we've seen has made progress.
Cool. Well, if people want more information, we'll make sure that we provide some links to get not only access to this, but some of the conversation threads that have been had on this. Portable contacts, clearly one of the most interesting building blocks being worked on now. In future shows, we'll tackle some of the other building blocks that we didn't get to in depth in the last episode. One thing before we go, one of the most interesting conferences in our space is South by Southwest, and we had an
Always
idea.
a barn raiser down in Austin, and
Yeah, it's really cool.
Up
It
in
seems to
March,
grow
yeah.
every year.
yeah.
We thought it'd be interesting if we took the Social Web TV on the road and did on location at South by Southwest. If you think that's a cool idea, this week they're opening up voting on what panels, and it's a very competitive process. So we'll also make sure to provide a link so that you can help to make this a reality.
If you want to see us there, you got to go vote for it. That's how they pick these polls, and
right.
there's a lot of people trying to get down there. So
right.
And
we'd love to do it.
want to announce that next week, episode 6 will be shot on location up in San Francisco at Lunch 2.0, hosted at MySpace's San Francisco headquarters. So if you're going to that event, be sure to come by and say hi. I'll be there with David Recordin as well as folks from MySpace.
Yeah, that's
I think
gonna be
you guys
exciting.
are going to be on vacation.
That'll be
Yeah.
our turn to be on vacation.
Yeah,
All right.
But MySpace always throws a great event, so I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that.
And if you can't be there live, make sure to see us online and join us for another exciting episode of The Social Web TV.